I get to introduce our wonderful, one of our co-founders, Ezra Levin, who is coming up next as a keynote speaker. And, his leadership really centers economic justice and racial justice. And he comes from being an associate director of the Federal Policy for Prosperity Now organization, which was a national anti-poverty nonprofit. Served as the deputy policy director for Congressman Lloyd Doggett in Texas, and really got a view of homelessness and what impacts it has. And so I see this in his leadership. I see him committing and centering racial equity in the work that we do. And without further ado, Ezra.
Hey, everybody. Oh, they weren't lying about those lights. I know what you're all thinking. Thank God this equity summit was missing a white guy in a blazer, and here I am to talk to you. Seriously, I have the mic now. I had nothing to do with getting you all in the seats or setting up the program. A round of applause for Lily and Trisha, who are here, two folks from Indivisible National. They're going to be joined here by Lexi, Kim, and Carly over the course of the weekend doing some trainings. It's incredible what they have put together, along with everybody else who is involved. I can't see you, but if you were part of putting this together, can you stand up so people can recognize you? I don't know if you're standing up. Thank you. So it's amazing to be here. At Indivisible National, almost everything that we talk about falls into one of two buckets. It's the how and the what. How are we going to win in 2020, and what are we going to do afterwards? I'm going to talk about that a little bit here, but the reason why I was actually excited to come here was because it's an opportunity to talk about the why. Why are we doing all this? How did Indivisible come about, and what have we been doing over the past 3 years that have led us to this moment? And so I'll keep my remarks mainly focused on what my expertise is, which is pretty darn limited. I was a Capitol Hill staffer. We don't know anything, but I saw how Congress works. And then I've spent the last 3 years traveling around the country, meeting with groups like yours who are working to build power in the hopefully short Trump era and build towards the post-Trump era. And I've seen how this power that didn't exist 3 years ago started building and crashing down on Washington in different ways. And so I'll keep my remarks mainly focused on that. But let's start out in a really dark place, which is the day after the election in 2016. Sorry, we'll get out of this soon, y'all. So the day after the election, Leah, my spouse, and I were going through the stages of grief just like anybody, and we sent an email out to a couple dozen of our friends in the area saying, look, we don't know what to do, but we feel like we should talk about it. We feel like we should come together and discuss what the future holds. And we were worried about three specific things. Number one was just the legislative agenda, the onslaught in typical policy terms coming at us from a unified conservative government that was promising to do big things. That was scary. Scarier than that, though, was that this new trifecta conservative government rode in on this rising tide of white nationalism. And it was a threat not just to the policies we held dear. I have an anti-poverty background. Leah worked on human trafficking. We had friends in education or environment or taxes or immigration. But it didn't matter which issue you were focused on. This was a fundamental threat to democracy itself. And we didn't know what that meant for the future. And the third problem that we identified that day was scariest of all, which is our elected leaders, including those in the Democratic Party, seemed wholly unprepared for what was about to come. And that last point was really highlighted a couple weeks after the election for us. There were two events within a 24-hour period that really just set us on this path we've been on for the last few years. First event was a future Trump appointee who would resign in disgrace. You don't know his name. There have been so many of them. But he was giving an interview, and he was citing positively Japanese internment camps as a historical example of what we might do with Muslims and immigrants. This was soon after the election. Within 24 hours of that, there's a New York Times piece, an interview with the incoming Democratic Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, in the Senate, in which he said, well, we lost the election. It happens. All we can do is try to figure out how to make deals with the other side. That's how politics works. So maybe we can work on infrastructure together. And that terrified me and Leah. It absolutely terrified us because the future, the bipartisan future that we were looking forward to was one in which Democrats and Republicans could link arms and build those internment camps. And unfortunately, that more or less did come to pass, but we'll talk about that in a sec. So we lost it. And as former congressional staffers, as I said, we couldn't do much in that moment, but we knew how Congress worked. So we thought, look, we saw the Tea Party, didn't agree with them, didn't like their racism, didn't like their violence, but we saw their effectiveness. We saw it used against us. So we thought, hey, we can write a guide, and we can say, here's how you can use these tactics. Here's how you can advocate for yourself. That was the theory. That was all of it. And we knew that they did a really good job of rooting themselves in American iconography, in history, in the symbolism of America. And that's one task for conservatives, for hyper-reactionaries, for white guys who want to maintain power. They can go and look at the founders and say, yeah, that's us. We're Tea Partiers. We're engaging in racist acts of rebellion against taxes. That feels right? For progressives, it's a different process, though, right? If you want to root yourself in what makes America America, you're not looking back to some historic past when it was great. What you're trying to find are symbols about what it can be, the ideals behind what America is supposed to be, not something we've accomplished, but something that we're striving for. And so we were thinking about what can we use? What symbolizes that? And we thought about, what school kids in places like this say every day, the Pledge of Allegiance, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Not a state that we've ever reached, but something that we aspire to. And it was rooted in this basic idea that it doesn't matter if you're not an immigrant or not a woman or not a Muslim. It matters that we stand together, because if you wait for your turn, as we heard earlier, you wait your turn to lose. That our only shot in this moment was to stand together indivisible, and then we might be able to survive this period and build something new. So I'm curious. I can't see y'all great, but can you raise your hands if y'all were part of an indivisible group early on in 2017? How about even if you weren't part of an indivisible group, if you came together with friends and family trying to figure out what to do after Trump got elected? Yep, so we were there too. Now, here's another question. This might be a little bit more uncomfortable. When you came together, maybe it was that first meeting, maybe it was a meeting a couple times later, did you look around the room and think, wow, there sure are a lot of white people here? So I've traveled all around the country. I've been from, I just came from California, New York, Texas, Louisiana, you name it. I've been traveling, talking to indivisible groups and other folks who are part of this wave of grassroots resistance. And what you see is disproportionately these groups are made up of white, college-educated women. That's not all of them, but disproportionately, that is the post-Trump wave of resistance. That's what I see. That's the facts on the ground. And it's okay to have mixed feelings about this. I'm from a town about a third the size of Prescott in Texas. And one thing I think about are the mega churches. And I think it's a brilliant tactic. I never grew up going to these, but I know that they have this tactic of saving the parking spots at the front for people who have never been there before. Because they're recruiting constantly. So great, we have more people in this fight, and we need them to win. But also, there's a reason why there was a specific demographic response to the election. It's because people of color, indigenous folk, immigrants were organizing for justice a lot longer before Trump was ever elected. There was a specific response to Trump's election that got a lot of new people involved, but that comes with some responsibility. We need to recognize that we're not the ones that are creating this fight. We didn't invent grassroots organizing. We're joining a generational-long struggle, and we're new to it. And that's great. That's healthy. And so I'm going to talk specifically to my fellow awkward white folks in the room for a second. And I want to talk about 3 pitfalls that I see when I travel around the country, when we're doing trainings for folks about how they can participate in this struggle. 3 things we see that we've got to overcome to be effective fighters for justice. 1 is defensiveness, 2 is awkwardness, and 3 is performance. Defensiveness is a very rational response when you're confronted with white supremacy as a white person. We see it all the time. People say, like the guy who was buying French fries, I'm not racist. I'm not one of the bad people. I'm not part of making this system the way it is. Why are you focusing your attention on me? You get angry. But defensiveness is the first barrier you got to overcome, because if you are defensive, if you don't recognize the privilege that you do have, you're not going to be able to do anything with that. So you got to move, and we work with folks, you got to move from defensiveness to acceptance. You got privilege. Nothing you can do about that. The question is what to do with it. And that gets us to awkwardness, which is a very natural state. Look at me. Awkwardness is as pernicious. You accept that you've got this privilege. You accept that you were born with this power. And you don't know how to talk about it. And you get weird when you're confronted with it. You're worried you're going to make things worse. Worst of all, you maybe go seek out the first person of color just to emote at them about how you're not a racist and like you're sorry. Don't do that. It is fine not to have all the information. Nobody was born with all the information. We've worked with a few trainers. I love this phrase. They talk about feedback is a gift. You're going to make mistakes. You're not going to have all the information you need. You can read and you can educate, you can discuss, you can form groups, you can hold events like this, and also when people give you information, you don't need to be embarrassed. You take that and improve. Go from this feeling of awkwardness to just having humility. We're all learning. This isn't an end result that we're building towards. This is a process where we need to continually self-improve. And that brings us to the third pitfall that we see a lot, and people have probably seen it online or elsewhere, and that's performance. You might think of it as performative wokeness, people who recognize they've got privilege, people who have the language to talk about it, and people who just love talking about it. They want to post to Facebook, they want those retweets, they want those clicks, they want everybody to know they're one of the good people. And they do everything they can to demonstrate that with their words. Alicia Garza, one of the founders of the Movement for Black Lives, has this great piece that I recommend folks read on the deficiency of the idea of allyship. That she's not looking for allies, she's looking for co-conspirators. And the difference here is action. I don't care what you have to say, I care what you do. And so, it's funny for me to say that I'm literally on a stage giving a performance right now, right? Indivisible does not always live up to this fact, none of us do. The points in Indivisible's history that I'm proudest of, though, are when we are standing, linking arms with communities that are directly under threat and fighting for justice with them. Literally last week, Indivisible had its largest week of action in Indivisible's 3-year history. It was an action in dozens of states by hundreds of groups in opposition to Trump's xenophobia and anti-immigrant hate. It was the Defund Hate campaign. This stuff doesn't happen automatically. We didn't wake up one day and say we're going to do it. We didn't wake up one day and say, hey, we got a lot of great ideas about how to fight for immigrant justice, and this is what we're going to do. We systematically, over years, have built relationships with leading immigrant rights groups around the country. We systematically worked with the strategic leaders on this, sitting at the table but following their lead. And then our role is to generate as much people power as possible to create the force that we need. That's when Indivisible is at its best. That's when this movement is really working. And folks, there's no time to not get this right, because we are facing an existential threat in America right now. And from our point of view, we've got a few months to get this right. White supremacy is on the ballot in 2020. It's on the ballot. And you might think I mean Donald Trump, and yes, I do mean Donald Trump, but it's not just Donald Trump who's on the ballot. We have voter purging happening in Georgia. We have indigenous communities being prevented from registering to vote in North Carolina. In Arizona, we have folks trying to strip the voting rolls. This is happening everywhere. It's not just Donald Trump, and it's not new. It's not new. So we believe that the defining issue in American politics right now is not whether we raise taxes a little or cut them a little, not if we spend a little bit more on social services or a little bit less. The defining issue is whether we have a democracy or not. That's what we're fighting right now. And I was particularly, this is great, I can't see the timekeeper, so I'm just gonna keep on going. I was particularly interested in coming here now and here specifically. I mean, I think people probably saw the New York Times series it's the 400th anniversary of the first Africans being captured, transported, and enslaved in Virginia. But I want to talk about a more recent event in the history of white supremacy in America, and that's 55 years ago this year. I literally walked right past the courtyard on the way over here in Prescott, and 55 years ago, in 1964, Barry Goldwater launched his campaign for the Republican nomination. And he launched it with this slogan, a choice, not an echo. A choice, not an echo. What he meant by that was not an echo of the ideological mushiness of the Republican Party as it had existed, but a choice for extremism, ideological extremism. And that's not my word, that's his word. He said, extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. Wrapped his arms around that. At the same time, within months of that, there is this bill, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that's moving through Congress. And he launched his campaign in part in direct opposition to that bill, a bill meant to desegregate schools like this and other public institutions. In early July of 1964, Lyndon Johnson signs that bill into law over the opposition of Barry Goldwater. After he passes over a pen to Martin Luther King Jr., whose grassroots organizing helped force through that legislation, he is said to have told his aides, the Democrats have lost the South for a generation, by which he meant there is a political realignment occurring as a result of this action. And that realignment is along lines of race. A couple weeks after that, Barry Goldwater wins the Republican nomination. Yep. And he goes down in defeat. He only wins Arizona in the Deep South. That's never happened with a Republican, but this was the start of something. This was a start of a change in how politics works. This is a start of the definition of the Democratic and the Republican parties that has continued up until this day. In 1960, back when Goldwater was thinking about running, we know that non-Hispanic whites made up about 85% of the population. That was the same that they made up 100 years before, after the Civil War. Today, it's about 60%, and that's dropping. When he was launching his campaign, there were fewer than 10 million immigrants in the country, representing less than 5% of the population. Today, there are 45 million immigrants, making up 14%, and that percentage is rising. The country is changing. The country's getting better. We're looking forward to it. We're not the only ones looking at these statistics, though. What we know is the other side understands that the country is getting more diverse and more unequal. And they had a choice. They didn't want an echo. They made the choice. And the choice was, do you moderate your positions in response to this changing electorate, or do you choose ideological extremism and undermine democracy? And we know what choice they made. Do y'all know Paul Weyrich? Paul Weyrich was a leader in the religious right movement. He was the co-founder of the Heritage Foundation, one of the leading conservative think tanks that still does a lot of damage. In 1980, he's speaking to a crowd. This is about 15 years after Barry Goldwater goes down, and he says publicly, I don't want everybody to vote. Frankly, our power goes down as the voting populace goes up. I don't want everybody to vote. That is their plan. That is their plan, and it is not just Barry Goldwater, it is not just Paul Weyrich. This has become the established position of the modern Republican Party at the national level. This is why we see Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader, stand on the floor, boo indeed. Moscow Mitch, as he's popularly known, stand on the floor of the U.S. Senate calling D.C. statehood, voting rights, and election security full-bore socialism and a power grab. That's ridiculous, but it's cynically effective. He understands that the biggest threat to his ideology becoming law is a fully representative democracy. That's why he fights it tooth and nail. And this is scary because there's a lot on the line in 2020. We don't know what's going to happen at the national level. We don't know what shenanigans Trump is going to pull other than we know he's going to pull them. But we do know that there is an opportunity to retake power next year. And that's not going to start next year. That starts right now. The reason why I am here in Arizona is there are paths to retaking the White House. There are paths to retaking the Senate. None of them are possible unless they go through Arizona. This isn't news to folks here, and I'm not just talking national level. You know that the way we get out the vote is to work, yes, for senators, but also for state leg, also for state senate, also for city council, also for school board. Sandra Kennedy, Katie Hobbs, Kirsten Sinema, they're not elected without the work of the folks in this room last year. The reason why we're going to win next year is because of the work you're going to do. So I know not everybody here is indivisible, but could anybody who is an indivisible group leader stand up? Everybody else, find these people and join their groups. Can I ask you, who in this room is going to participate in some kind of voter registration between now and 2020? Yeah? Who in this room is going to go and text voters? Who's going to phone bank? Who's going to knock on doors? The way that we win is going to be the way we won in 2018. And what we know is no election is won just in October and November of Election Day. It's won months, years before. The way we build up the strength we have to build up is by events like this, repeated again and again and again, by saving those parking spots at the front for new people, because we need to build this movement together. So thank you to everybody who is part of this in Arizona. The country is depending on you. Democracy is depending on you. The world is depending on you. So last request, could y'all just show me what democracy looks like? Show me what democracy looks like. Show me what democracy looks like. Yes, it does. Okay, thanks, y'all.